What's up, football fans? Lindsay Rhodes and Sam Bruchhaus here with another edition of the Sumer Sports Show. We are going to take a look at what just happened for the NFL draft in terms of what it actually means for next year in fantasy. What I realized, Sam, last week, I went on a fantasy radio show and I've done so much fantasy content over the years. And I had not thought about this draft class in terms of fantasy because we'd been talking about them in terms of where they should go and like real NFL implications. And when I started thinking about fantasy, I realized that I might be looking at these guys in a totally different way than other people in the fantasy community. And that felt like a very interesting exercise for me. So I literally pulled up a fantasy rankings list and I went, oh, I don't think I agree. And I closed it immediately. Like, I don't want to see this anymore. I want to come to all of my own conclusions. And so I went team by team through the depth charts, how I think it looks. One of the mistakes I think we make in the fantasy space is we get enamored by the talent that we've attached to them, the evaluation that we've made going into the draft. This guy's really good. Boom, fantasy. Like, obviously we're looking at landing spots, but I think we almost need to reverse engineer it and almost kind of forget about the talent and what our evaluation was prior to the draft. And now look at the opportunity that's sitting in front of them, because there are some guys who are clearly very, very good who went to spots that you're like, I don't know how they get on the field this year. Like, you know, dynasty draft, totally different conversation, but Emeka Egbuka, like, I love him. Tez Johnson, I love him. I don't know that I can draft them that high in fantasy because they're in just like a cluster of wide receivers down there with the Bucks. So I think that this will be really interesting. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. We're going to go team by team. And I'm really interested on where we're going to kind of land at the end of this.
Yeah. The Met Gala was on last night, and I think this year in particular, because of so many running backs, it's a lot like the Met Gala. Like, there's a theme, but you got to be able to hit the theme. And a lot of these players, like you mentioned, Emeka Egbuka, a lot of these tailbacks, they're probably not going to hit the theme this year. They're not going to have the diamond brooch. They're not going to have the beautiful diamonds just because they're with like 5 other tailbacks. Like, it's going to be really interesting, obviously, as you said, because we deeply went into who these players were, what their profiles were in college, where they may go, what their projection across the league could be, given like where they were drafted, what the expectation of that is. And now just to kind of sit back and look at, okay, what might happen in the games is really exciting. So I'm glad that you brought this exercise up. It definitely is a different muscle that I'm excited to get back into.
Totally.
And like, we're starting to talk about games, Lindsay. Like, the games are coming. We have like 3 months or 4 months, but just like looking at the rosters was fun for me.
And like you're saying, like, you know, to a degree, we talked about our talent evaluation for several months. Now the league has weighed in on what they think of them. And so we might be like, I don't know, that wasn't my favorite. Well, team A drafted him in the 2nd round. So clearly they are going to prioritize them in this offense. And now let's try and forget what we know, or take what we thought we knew and then put it through a prism of what might they be thinking? What do they need in their offense? Where are their opportunities in the depth chart? There are some names, like there's a name that, we'll get to as we go through this, where I'm like, I don't know that anyone's looking at this from a fantasy standpoint, but I'm going to just put it on I've got a names to watch list. Yep. I'll say that. It's not even a sleepers list or anything like that right now, but these are the names that I'm going to be paying special close attention to come training camp time, where I'm looking for clues as to like, where are they on this depth chart? Because I don't like the depth chart ahead of them. And so I think that there's opportunity, if they're good at all, to maybe rise fairly quickly. And so this will be fun. So let's start at the top. I am going to go alphabetical order in terms of the team's nicknames. And first thing I want to say, though, two things I want to say. One of the themes that emerged for me as I was doing this is there are so many Jalen and Jadens in this class. What is happening with that name? There's an explosion of Jalen and Jadens around 22 years ago. Everyone named their kid this. There are so many guys. The Texans drafted 3 Jalens and 1 Jaden in their rookie class alone. We've got Jaden Higgins. We've got Jalen Knoll. We've got Jalen Smith. We've got Jalen Reed. What? And that's not even counting the Jalen Lane and Jaden Blue and Jalen Royals. Like, as I was going through this, I was like, how do I spell this Jalen's name?
So if you're an NBA fan, this happened like 4 years ago because like for the obvious reason of you're allowed to go into the NBA after your freshman year and you go to the NFL after your junior, senior year. And so if you watch the Knicks Celtics game, which I am still unsure of how the Knicks won, but I'm glad they did, you had Jalen Brunson guarding Jaylen Brown. And there was, Jalen's all over the field, the court. And look, I don't know if this is true, but if you watch the Fab Five documentary, the 30 for 30, Jalen, of course, now there's so many Jalens, I can't remember his name, but like he was on ESPN, he played for Michigan. But anyway, he claims that he was the first ever Jalen, which would have been like 95. And then he played until like 2005. So it seems as if like
Rose.
Now
it's Rose.
is the.
I feel like my audio dropped out
Rose,
when I was saying that. So I wanted on the record that I knew who you were talking about. Okay.
Yeah, Jalen Rose. So he claims he's the first ever Jalen. If that is true, that would make sense because that was literally 25 years ago ish, and so now there's a ton of Jalens everywhere.
Everyone named their kid after Jalen Rose. That's fascinating. Anyway,
and there's about to be more in New York City if Jalen Brunson continues winning in this series.
Oh man. All right. So that's one thought. The second was, I'm one of the things that I was looking for is how sticky our Sumer scores were in terms of projecting who was going to be good, because some of these people that were drafted that I was less familiar with, I'd kind of go look through our tracking data metrics and see like, if maybe they had just flown under the radar during the draft process, but like we were in on it. And some of them, that was not the case. Some of them were like 50th percentile, run Sumer score or, wide receiver Sumer score or something like that. And so there wasn't anything that necessarily popped for us. And so then I went back and I looked at like, well, let's look at, the last few years and just see the guys that did pop right away. Like, could we have predicted that? Is this maybe a sticky metric? I'm not sure if it is across the board, but I will say Bucky Irving was a 98th percentile run Sumer score. Tyrone Tracy, who got a lot of run last year with the Giants, with an open opportunity for him, like we talked about, 98th percentile run Sumer score. Puka, who is obviously the gold standard in terms of wide receivers. I went back and looked at that and I was like, well, would we have been able to spot that? Puka was upper 90th percentile in everything his last 2 years in college. Yeah. I mean, the fact that he fell to the 5th round, and I know that there were reasons that were tied to things that weren't specifically talent, but like, it's wild to me. He was, in terms of his wide receiver Sumer score, the last year at BYU, he ranked 2nd out of 587 wide receivers in the country. And the year before, he ranked 1st out of 586. So there is some stickiness there, which is not to say that there are not people that will rise or that were in bad situations for one reason or another and their talent didn't pop in the tracking. But I do think it's interesting. And there are a few whose names will come up throughout, and I'll try and reiterate who are the ones that really pop in that metric as we go through it. Let's start with the Bears, who drafted a ton of guys who could see the field immediately. We've got Colston Loveland. We've got Luther Burden. Are any of the guys here people that you think are guys that you want in fantasy right away?
So, Lindsay, you were highlighting kind of all draft season the need of a lot of teams to have like a power slot. Yeah. And I think a lot of people were slotting Rome Odunze into that quote power slot Amon-Ra St. Brown role, especially after the Bears hired Ben Johnson. I think that could be Luther Burden. And am I fascinated by Luther Burden's role on this team? Yes, because it seems as if they're going to run a lot of 12 personnel, which means that Kmet and Loveland are going to be on the field a lot. And so it's like, who are going to be those two wide receivers that will also be on the field? And, that's where it starts getting a little sticky, especially given they have DJ Moore, Odunze, they now have Luther Burden. But I think in the situations that they go 11, I think Burden will have more of the Amon-Ra St. Brown intermediate type routes as compared to DJ Moore, who I think is going to be their yak guy. and Odunze, who's going to be kind of more of their like true outside wide receiver, which is what he played at Washington, what he didn't really play last year. So there's a lot of interesting nuances about this offense, but it all comes back to Caleb. I think Caleb Williams is going to probably have a lot lower ADOT this year, average depth of target. And if he is able to hit those short to intermediate routes, it could change the face of, all of these guys' fantasy outputs. But in particular, I think there is some hidden value with Luther Burden, particularly if he begins to fit into that Amon-Ra St. Brown mode.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting thought. There is, when you zoom out and you look at like DJ Moore and Rome Odunze both being there, then it kind of becomes a mouths to feed situation for me.
Yep.
I think from a real world football standpoint, I see a role for him immediately for sure. In terms of translating that into enough targets and yards and just opportunities to put up fantasy points regularly, I don't know that I love this. However, some of the things that Ben Johnson said, I think are really interesting. Like he said, we may have turned up the notch a couple dials for certain people in this building. That feels relevant potentially with regard to Luther Burden and some of the names that you mentioned, and maybe even most specifically DJ Moore. But I also think that Ben Johnson even saying that is more like the fact that he's trying to light a fire under potentially DJ Moore shows how much DJ Moore is the priority. Like we need to get you playing to the best of your ability. And I think Luther Burden is a guy who helps him get there. And I'm still most interested in DJ Moore as the wide receiver here. So I don't know exactly where I land on Luther Burden in the larger picture of wide receivers in fantasy, but my guess is he's not particularly high.
Yeah.
In terms of ADPs for me, Colston Loveland is interesting, but it kind of goes back to the same thing. And, I like Colston Loveland a lot. I think obviously, since this is Ben Johnson, there's like a connection where we go, he's his Sam Laporta. Well, that sounds appealing. Don't love immediately that Cole Kmet is still there. I do see them running a lot of 12. And then in the future, probably this becomes a role that is very specifically Colston Loveland, kind of like Trey McBride in Arizona. Like when he first came in, it was still Ertz, at first. He didn't immediately take over that role. And now he's like a fantasy superstar that you want because it all kind of goes through him from a tight end standpoint. Love Colston Loveland for Dynasty. I don't know that I love him as much for season long this year. Again, just because of all the mouths to feed within that offense.
Right.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think that's the interesting thing that I picked up about these first round tight ends is, like I was espouting the analytics gospel of like, don't draft the tight end in the first round. And then like, let's just stick with Loveland for right now. As you said, I don't know how much volume he's going to get. And so like, what does that mean for that pick long-term in the process of things? Especially given that, as you said, they have DJ Moore, who's probably going to be in the priority in that offense. That's not to say that they're also probably going to run the ball quite a bit behind that rebuilt offensive line. And so it really does not call into question the pick in essence, because as you noted, he's probably a better dynasty play than he is a redraft play. But, like, I don't know how much usage he's going to get. It's like difficult to project that forward. And obviously they have a better idea of that than us, but just like looking at it on paper, it is questionable.
It's one of those things where I think all of these pieces really help immediately the Bears.
Yeah.
When you parse out these pieces to us in fantasy, in a perfect world, you want the ball to be spread around pretty evenly amongst all of them. And I don't know how helpful that is to any of us that need it to be like one guy all the time. Again, if I had to bet, I would still bet on DJ Moore being the guy that's worth carrying there. You brought up the run game. And so this is, I think probably one of my more random ones. I don't know. Cause again, I told you, I've been like very purposefully shutting out the fantasy analysis world to see where I land on my own. And then I'll go back and see if it matches up with anything. But Kyle Menangi is a guy who suddenly pops on my radar. in the ways that I mentioned before, we're like, now I'm going to be just watching what comes out of here because the other running backs there are DeAndre Swift and Roschon Johnson. And because I think this was a landing spot where some of us thought they were going to draft a running back in the first round. And the reasons behind why we thought that, now, obviously they didn't do that and they waited forever. And so clearly they don't necessarily think they need to upgrade the position as much as we do. But Swift had a rushing yards over expectation per attempt of negative 0.69 last year. His yards per carry of 3.79 ranked 39th out of running backs with 100 plus carries. His success rate of 34%, not good. Tackle for loss rate of 12.3%, not good. First down rate of 17%, not great. Yards after contact per attempt is 2.28, ranked 42nd amongst running backs. Like, I'm just rattling off a list of things where clearly partially this could be environmental. The Bears offense was not one that's going to be conducive to running backs last year anyway, because it wasn't a good offense in ways that felt somewhat inexplicable. Maybe the health of the offense in general helps all of these numbers go up. But again, having nothing to do with him specifically, but just the opportunity that's in front of him, that's a name that I'm kind of going to circle and just keep my eye on during training camp.
Yeah, there's all kinds of these players who it's like, do I know the profile? Do I know the background? Sure. In the pre-draft, did I expect them to be like a difference maker? Not necessarily. Is the opportunity there? Yes. And I think, that was kind of the case with Puka in particular. And so if you're trying to find that value, particularly like week 1, week 2 waiver wire guys, I think if you have your eye on some of the people that I'm sure we'll cover, including the running back room for the Bears, it's going to be like an interesting play to see how it ends up.
Yep. For the Bengals, they drafted a running back in the 7th round. Again, Same thing, right? Usually 7th rounders are not exactly popping off the page from a fantasy standpoint, but there are some position groups, and running back is one of them, where I think it's honestly, it's more about opportunity than it is about like where you were drafted. Chase Brown obviously is the guy who gets the majority of that opportunity. Taj Brooks feels like a guy that you could maybe pair with him in the backfield. Had a lot of missed tackles forced, kind of a banger type of guy. Mm-hmm. Does he seem like somebody that you could see getting on the field in any type of rotation in a like, assuming that things go well for him in practices moving forward, or do you think there's not an opportunity?
So last year, I thought Zach Moss was going to have a lot more juice than he ended up having. Than he ended up having, and I think that's just because they like Chase Brown, and Chase Brown does what they need him to do. I think this team is built around 3 players: T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and Joe Burrow. And as a result, Chase Brown fits into that as a running back who can get involved in the passing game and do what he needs to do when they run it. This is a team that was 5th in EPA per pass last year. I think they're pretty solely dependent on Burrow's health. If Burrow's in the lineup, they're going to have an awesome passing game. And it's going to be about getting Jamar Chase the ball. And it's going to be targeting T. Higgins on 3rd and on like downs where it matters. And so I just get worried about the running back room for the Bengals in that situation, even if it is Chase Brown, who was very effective last year and ate up a lot of volume. But when that player is your 4th focus on an offense, even going down to Taj Brooks, obviously, as well, I just get worried about the sustainability of that.
Yeah, and maybe those are all good points. I feel like, though, if you are assuming that they're going to be a good offense, you're going to run the ball every once in a while, like, because you're not going to throw on every down. And so then it sets your running back, when he does get the ball, to have more success. And so I wonder if it doesn't, and this isn't necessarily a Taj Brooks point that I'm making now, but I think that Chase Brown gets a boost because the pieces in the passing game are so strong. And so you just figure it's going to be a healthy environment that's going to elevate him. Whatever his talent is, he's going to probably play better than his talent level because of the offense. And running back is just such a weird position, where I think whoever gets on the field as a running back in the Bengals offense probably get some degree of a boost.
Yeah.
Like I'm more interested in that than I am a guy who's going to get volume. And there are some examples that are going to come up here, but I think they're going to be in a bad offense.
Fair.
There are some guys where I was like, I really like this guy, but I think the offense is going to be terrible, and it's a running back. And so, ugh. I don't want any shares of that.
I think you bring up a great point, which is like, get a Bengals running back. I think what I fear, especially going into like fantasy drafts, is the Chiefsification of this running back room, where it's like, now Kareem Hunt is the running back. Now Isaiah Pacheco is the running back. Years ago, Clyde Edwards-Helaire was the running back. Like, who the running back will be fantasy viable. The question is, who is that going to be? And I don't have a great answer to
that. What about the Bills? Anyone pop to you here?
So I think James Cook is just going to be like a certified running back one this year. He's been pretty good in all of our Sumer scores, particularly last year. The question that comes about is they liked kind of rotating him with Ray Davis and Ty Johnson last year. And the question,
Ty was surprisingly good from time to time.
Yeah,
down the stretch.
Exactly. And so the question becomes is like very similar to our Bengals analysis. Like, this team is going to be good because they have Josh Allen probably, and because they have a pretty good offensive line. As a result, they will probably run the ball a lot. They definitely like got a lot more out of the running game last year, because especially when they started getting hot in the season and were like really beating teams pretty badly. And I just think that James Cook is a lot bigger of a player in their game plans, like in particular Joe Brady's game plans, than we probably think on the face. Now, there is questions about the extension, but on the same side, like contract year. And I just think he's going to be a really viable player. And I'm really going to like keep a close eye when I do my fantasy drafts on James Cook this year.
All right. Wants to get paid. I don't know if I support that conceptually. I mean, to a degree, right? Like, I guess it's all relevant because the running backs, what would you advise them to do with regards to paying him? Like, how high do you go? What are you willing to do?
So I thought they were going to draft a running back, or at least like maybe like take a shot. They didn't end up like really attacking that position, which makes sense. As I said, like they rotated 3 guys in last year. So I don't think they really viewed it as a position of need at all. Like, it's tough. Like the problem is like, if there is a team that can pay a running back, it's the team that has Josh Allen as the quarterback. And so it's like, but on the flip side, like, then you actually don't need to pay the running back because you have Josh Allen as your quarterback. So it's like kind of 2 sides of the same coin, kind of like a barbell in a way. And, I probably would not extend him. I'd probably look elsewhere, frankly, like just seeing how teams have been successful when you have a top 2 quarterback or a top 3 quarterback on your team.
Right.
But like flip side of the coin is this is a really good offense. And so it's like fantasy viable, yes. Long-term team building, probably not going to invest heavily in
him. Yeah, I'm with you. I thought that they would draft a running back, and I put a running back. I put Hampton there. I think it was Hampton in my mock draft, partially just to make a point, like that. At the end of the first round, teams that can afford to do things that we think are weird in other spots of the first round. Obviously they spent a lot of assets on the defensive side of the ball and tried to upgrade themselves in that area. And so I get that, but I thought that because of the James Cook payment stuff, that they might just go get themselves somebody that they could plug in for the future. But I think that there are lots of different ways that you can do that. So we'll see. Jackson Hawes, who's the tight end that they drafted, feels more like a potential threat to Dawson Knox than Kincaid for me because of the type of tight end profile that he has. I see him more as like a blocking tight end. And so I'm not particularly excited about him for fantasy. They drafted a wide receiver in the 7th round. I don't know that that's on my radar just yet. Moving on to the Broncos. For fantasy, this defense is one that we now are going to need to have conversations about with regards to the other teams in the AFC West and their wide receivers, like, and quarterbacks. Like, how are you going to throw on this team? I don't know. That defensive backfield is crazy, adding Jahdae Barron to make their strength even stronger. So, but that's something to just like note, and we'll have that conversation when, you know, the games come up. But the running back RJ Harvey out of UCF, I think, is the prime example. And I don't think that we're alone in highlighting this of like, okay, throw away all of the talent evaluation going into the draft. He landed in a spot where it is prime for opportunity. So he's obviously somebody that we have to think about moving up our fantasy running back rookie charts anyway. Reading his evals with Alvin Kamara's role in mind, I can see what they're thinking there in terms of him. And he had, as I said, sometimes these things are sticky, a 92.8% run Sumer score. And the year before, an 86th percentile guy. So he is somebody who, according to our tracking data metrics, is somebody who has the talent to maybe make the most of this opportunity that I think we see in front of him.
Yeah. And I also think that offensive line being strong is a key here. Like that was who they played through last year, and they weren't able to get the run game particularly going. And I think like if you're going to evaluate it, I think early on in the season, it probably will be a little bit more, you know, Audric Estime getting carries, Jaleel McLaughlin getting carries, but it's clear that they are attacking this position with RJ Harvey in mind. And so it's going to be interesting to see, especially as we get closer to fantasy season, how this plays out, because as you noted, this is not only a great opportunity, but this is an offense that throws the ball to tailbacks all the time. And so with that in mind, like it adds a whole other dimension of value, particularly if they're planning to use RJ Harvey in the passing game as well, especially given, you know, Bo Nix is pretty low ADOT, like typically a little bit more conservative in his pass profile. There could be potential that if Harvey is able to stand out above Estime and McLaughlin, that he could be getting not only a lot of carries, but also a lot of, you know, receptions.
Yeah. And I mean, look, Jaleel McLaughlin in certain advanced metrics kind of has popped for the last couple of years, but it seems clear that for whatever reason, Sean Payton isn't in love with him as being his main guy. There was still Javonte Williams getting rotated back in last year. Like they did this back and forth thing. And I think that we just have enough of a sample size that no matter what we think he might be able to do, McLaughlin, it seems pretty apparent that maybe the coaching staff there in Denver isn't seeing that kind of a role for him. And so just everything to me is pointing to RJ Harvey having a pretty big role there. We could be wrong, but I think that there's a reason that they drafted him. And I think that they view him as a guy who can do a lot of things for them. And they talked about in the build up to the draft, running backs who can play 3 downs. Like so to me, I think that they're looking for that guy that they could just put on the field and stay on the field, you know, a little bit like an Alvin Kamara. And I think RJ Harvey kind of checks those boxes. What about Pat Bryant, who they took in the 3rd round? I think that he's a guy we have to keep an eye on because of the Broncos' lack of dominant wide receivers. Like, frankly, this is a wide receiver room that I think could get upgraded across the board. Sutton, in terms of, you know, wide receiver 1 is probably on the lower end of wide receiver 1s. I like Mims. I think Mims has a lot of like special skill sets that really pop. But I mean, oh my God, I've been begging with Sean Payton for them to use him more frequently, and like just can't make him do that. Devon Vele had some I think he flashed in some ways last year, but none of these guys are like, oh, they're dominant, you know, like that guy's job is set. And so I think that there's potentially an opportunity for Pat Bryant to get on the field.
Yeah, Pat Bryant's an interesting I meets the AI guy, because Sean Payton like brought up Mike Thomas when he was talking about Pat Bryant, which is like,
that's good.
I was like, yeah, I mean, that's typically good. And then you're talking about like seeing the stickiness of these Sumer scores. Like, this is a guy who just everything was blue chip. And so when you mix the size, you know, 6'2", 6'3", 205 with Sean Payton, you know, referencing a player that set records for him, and you look at the AI, it all kind of does come together. I'm going to be interested because similarly, there's like a lot, you mentioned some of the names, but add Evan Ingram into that as well. Like there's a lot of mouths to feed in this offense. And so
do you think it is that way? Because I don't see any mouths that I need to feed. Like I think Evan Ingram has a role because they've talked about the Joker. I think Sutton is targeted, but I mean, you could take targets away from Cortland Sutton in my mind. So
yeah,
I don't know. I think there's a lot of opportunity because of the lack of mouths that specifically are demanding the ball. I don't think anyone in this offense is that guy.
I think that's fair. I'm just unwilling to project Pat Bryant to be that target earner. And also like the understanding that, Marvin Mims is going to be involved. Vele is going to be involved. Like they have like these kind of like gadget. Troy Franklin's going to be involved. Like they have all these kind of gadget guys. And so it's going to be like, it's just fascinating, especially given, and it always comes back to this, is like, do we expect Bo Nix to be as competent? I'm not going to say good because he wasn't that great, but like, is he going to be as competent as he was last year? And that's a real question for me.
Yeah. I think for me, almost all of the thoughts that I'm trying to articulate today are all about opportunity, potential opportunity, as opposed to this is the dude. And I think for sure, I just think where there's opportunity, I'm kind of giving people bumps, and so to me, I feel like there is a lot of opportunity within this offense for somebody to rise. Definitely. If Pat Bryant has a good training camp, rookie mini camp, whatever, like if he establishes that there are certain things that he can do and he really draws the eye of the coaches, then I think targets are up for grabs in that offense. What about the Browns, who are clearly signaling a shift to more smash mouth football, drafting a tight end in the third? I think we're going to see a lot of 12 there with Harold Fannin and David Njoku. Fannin, who was a reception machine in college at a small school, Bowling Green, so that makes the projection to the NFL a little bit tougher. But with David Njoku also on the field, potentially or rotating, I think the fact that they took him so high means that he's not necessarily just a depth piece, although it could mean that. It could mean that like where the Rams are concerned, for instance, I kind of see the tight end that they drafted also pretty high, not necessarily signaling that they want to go a bunch of 12. I think it's just like we run these packages and the tight end is very important here. And we've had a lot of injuries, and so Higbee, if he's not on the field, it's important we have somebody else we can put there. And this is important in our process. But in this particular case, I think it, especially with the running back that they drafted in round 2 and the lack of a quarterback, I think it all kind of signals like more strength up front. What do you see?
I have no idea. The Browns are like,
that's a great answer.
The Browns are like 7 question marks in my brain. And like, I'm trying to parse anything out and I just can't do it. I don't know who's going to play quarterback. They now have 2 rookie running backs plus Jerome Ford. And I don't, Judy had a great year last year. But it felt like he was like a Jameis merchant at times. And so like, I may stay away from this team, just like totally
entirely
in fantasy drafts. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's fair, to be honest. I literally wrote down in my notes, I don't want any of their quarterbacks or wide receivers. And then I said, maybe Judy late. And I don't think that you'll be able to get him late. I think somebody's going to grab him like in a middle round, because I think that it's weird that they didn't draft a wide receiver. I mean, I think like of all the teams, and you could go back and argue the value of all of it, but like putting Travis Hunter in this particular offense as a wide receiver, Travis Hunter is somebody we're talking about for fantasy purposes, regardless of the quarterback, because he obviously becomes wide receiver 1 in this offense on day 1. It's not Jerry Jeudy, but under the circumstances, Jerry Jeudy is the wide receiver 1, just like by default. And so, I mean, I assume he'll be targeted. I kind of am assuming they're going to be behind and throwing. I don't love the people they're throwing to. I don't love their options of people to throw the ball. None of that paints a picture of like, who you should go get is a running back in a bad offense.
Right.
So, I mean, but Quinshon Judkins is obviously an interesting running back. And if you're going to go just like, if you're going to go heavy personnel a lot, and try to run, I don't know. None of it makes sense to me. I think you might be right. I think it might just be stay away.
I think if I was trying to like draw a corollary with a team last year, I'd draw the corollary to the Chargers, where it's like they're going to play through their defense and they're not going to like have a ton of fantasy viable players on their offense. And that team had Justin Herbert, who's like a top 10, top 5 quarterback. This team has at quarterback, like I don't know who's playing quarterback for them. So it's a real tough parse out, if not projection as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a bummer. So let's move on to a team that is kind of a bummer in a different way. And that's because there's so much excitement that is potentially there. I like the Bucks roster is wild on offense. Like this is such a stacked offense. It's going to be so fun. But I don't know what I can do with the rookies for fantasy because it's so stacked. So they draft one of my favorite wide receivers in the draft in Emeka Egbuka. You talked about how I was like power slot for all these different teams. Well, this is not one of them that I was like, you know what they really need is someone like Emeka. I love it in retrospect because Chris Godwin is obviously up there in age. He's been dealing with injuries in the last few years. And Emeka is a guy that you can just plug in as like the post Chris Godwin plan. And also if he is injured, then he plugs into that spot and that's awesome. Tez Johnson is another guy who I really, really liked. They took him in the 5th round. I think that's awesome. He's like a Tank Dell comp for me. 99th consumer score this year and last year, and 98th in 2022. So he's a guy I really like, but like, how does he fit in this outside of just maybe being a return man in year 1? And so I'm not sure if there's just opportunity for either of those two guys to return value in fantasy immediately, but they become a really interesting conversation in like dynasty drafts for me,
right?
Because you figure, you know, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, because of age, like the plan is pretty obvious in terms of, well, especially with Emeka, you know, he has a long-term role there.
Yeah. The question too is like, the fact that the depth of the wide receiver position for this team is like weighing down potentially Mike Evans, who is, you know, one of the probably going to be a Hall of Famer, is crazy. Like the fact that they have, you know, McMillan and Tez Johnson and Emeka Egbuka and Godwin is coming back. It's just such a, I don't want to say an embarrassment of riches because obviously you're leaning heavily on 2 rookies, but and a ton of investment at that position. And especially given how good this run game was unexpectedly last year. Like people forget that 2 years ago with pretty much the same team, they really were not good at running the ball. And that was the case all the way back when Brady was the quarterback. And so you add in that running game, you add in Bucky Irving, and it's like you said, it's kind of it kind of sucks because there's so many people to parse through.
Yeah. But the people who do get on the field, I think are going to have a lot of opportunity to have success.
Oh, yeah.
I love what they did from a draft standpoint in terms of just building up the offense, and bringing in a bunch of different, you know, guys who kind of check different boxes and give them different gadgets, so to speak.
Right.
Is there anyone else there? I don't think I think those that are relevant for us.
Yeah.
I mean, outside of bets, obviously, just talking.
Yeah. Just to like put a cap on it, the Bucks attacked the draft in a way that you wouldn't have known they were a playoff team last year. And I think that was really prudent from them to be like, obviously they probably think they're good, but to be like, we don't actually think we're good enough to not just draft good players. And I think that was really prudent from them. I think it's going to really pay off offensively this year.
Yeah. I mean, and also there's something to be said for preparing for the future when you don't have to prepare for the future. So now you're not drafting out of desperation, which is the conversation we had about so many teams at quarterback in particular. And then the league spoke and clearly was pretty clear on not liking this year's quarterback class for the most part. And so the conversations that we had in the build up to it about guys being pulled up the board because of the need, like no one wants to be in that position. That's not a smart roster building strategy. And so if you can go get those guys right now and you know that you've got guys that are going to age out, make yourself stronger in the short term, and then also make your roster health strong in terms of long term so that you can pick best available at these other positions. I just think I love that kind of forward thinking approach. Not everybody has the luxury of being able to build that way. And I kind of love that they did it. Oh, also, by the way, we're talking about two teams here recently that took in the Bucks wide receivers and the Broncos defensive backs and saying like, we're strong here. We're going to be even stronger. Like we are just going to double down on the thing that we do really, really well to ensure that this is always a strength for us. And then, we can fill some of the other holes elsewhere, but we're going to make sure we're dominant in one particular area in the pass game. I think is that for the Bucks, although frankly, the run game is looking pretty good too. So offense in general, Cardinals, I've got nothing. They drafted all defense except one guard in the 6th. So I didn't particularly have anything to point out from a fantasy standpoint here. The Chargers, that is not the case. They added some interesting pieces here. Marion Hampton, obviously with their first round pick, you assume he's going to be on the field a lot this season because of where they took him. I love the type of running back that he is, especially for that offense. Like they, I think, are going to try and run through people's faces with him and Najee. But my question for him is how they're going to split those snaps. Like, did we essentially lose both of them as fantasy picks when Omarion landed here?
It's an excellent question, and I think you highlighted it really well. I think Jim Harbaugh's whole goal with this team is to make it a quality rushing team. Last year, they were pretty average in terms of EPA per rush, but they really deeply struggled at times, especially when injuries hit. And so it feels like their offensive line is ready to go. Like I know, like we don't think about offensive linemen a ton when regarding fantasy, but like Slater, Zion, Bozeman, they add Mekhi Becton, all like not only is there a lot of consistency plus Becton, but it's also guys that you would expect to continue progressing in their career. I think honestly, like you look at like the great 2-man backfields right now, and like Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs were both viable last year. Saquon was obviously like kind of the main,
but they're different
guy
styles.
For the Eagles. Yeah.
Do you think that these guys are different styles, Marion Hampton and Najee?
I think Najee will end up being used more in the passing game than Hampton. And so we do have to consider that. A lot of the kind of subjective views on Hampton was that he was a little unpolished in the passing game. And so I think as a result, he ends up as like de facto in terms of usage running back 2 on this team. And so I'd trust Najee a little bit more to be the type of usage earner that he has been for the past 4 years. But then at the same time, like the running back position typically comes with injuries. When you have a guy who's played virtually every single snap, obviously shared some time with Jaylen Warren, but for the most part was available to play a snap for 4 straight years, you have to expect that, the buck is going to stop somewhere. So I really like both of them. I think they're both fantasy viable. Do I think, they're going to be running back 1 or even running back 2 on a ton of fantasy teams? Probably not, but they're going to be pretty premium flex and bench composition type players.
The tight end draft pick here, I think, is interesting. And I absolutely might be barking up all the wrong trees, but I'm kind of wondering if relevant to what we just said about the running backs, if maybe they are not going to try to go more 12 personnel than they did last year. Last year, I think they ran the lowest rate. Lowest rate of 12 personnel, 5.8%, according to Sumer Sports. You can go find those stats for free at sumersports.com. I'm wondering, like, they stocked up on tight ends this year, not necessarily high-end tight ends, but they've got so many people listed on their depth chart at the tight end position. They went out and they brought in Tyler Conklin. They already had Will Dissly, who they used a lot. And I'm thinking of where Joe Ortiz, who's their general manager, knew in the last 2 years, where he came from. He came from Baltimore. What does Baltimore do? They run 12 personnel, like out the wazoo, right? Like they run the ball, they run 12. They kind of have always deprioritized to a degree the pass catchers that are there. And that might have to do with something that we see around the league in terms of Buffalo, in terms of Kansas City. When you have an elite quarterback, you don't have to expend all of your financial resources or draft resources on the highest of high-end wide receivers. Go put it elsewhere because your quarterback will elevate the wide receiver play. I think I see the wide receiver room in Los Angeles, the Chargers, sort of similar to that. Like they haven't really made big plays at the wide receiver position. And they did go draft Trey Harris out of Ole Miss. And it sounds like they like him a lot. But I wonder if they're not putting themselves in a position to just go heavy, and that helps out the run game. And then also, if you have more of a threat in the short and intermediate because of the types of players you're putting on the field that you have to focus on defensively, if that doesn't just open up the wide receivers, who again are not the highest of high-end wide receivers, but Justin Herbert, if you leave them open or if they're able to get open and all the defense is down here close to the line, he's going to hit them. So I'm wondering if that might be a direction that we're going in here, where Oronde Gadsden, who is a former wide receiver pass catching tight end. This is not a blocking tight end. I'm not saying he can't block, but I'm saying his past is as a wide receiver, and they know that. So I'm wondering if he maybe was brought in for that type of a role.
I think you bring up an interesting point, and thinking about like what Greg Roman likes to do, it would make sense. The confounding element here is they love to go 21 personnel with Scott Matlock. And it's like, if you're bringing in Matlock to be that guy, that's the more the like blocker snap type stuff. And, you know, you're not going to get a ton of passing. It's like kind of the same thing as Pat Ricard, I guess, to a certain degree. So I'm like kind of like dotting both T's at once, but it's the fact that Matlock is going to get so many snaps, or is at least expected to be, like, I don't think they're going to just stop using him, does confound the tight end situation a little bit, because that's basically like 4 guys that you would expect to be in the mix. I would project Gadsden's usage to be a little bit more like Stone Smart last year, where of like, if Disley goes down, you probably would take a look at him. But I think they brought him in to basically be like an upgrade over Stone Smart as like that third kind of pass catching tight end with the heavy personnel that they like going with. The Conklin, like you said, it is like a little confusing. I don't know exactly what this offense is going to look like, other than I wouldn't be shocked if there's more, 12 and 22 personnel on the field as compared to
They did run a lot of 22 last year.
Yeah.
Relative. Like nobody runs a lot of 22, but they, of the teams that ran 22, they ran it at a higher rate than I think almost anybody. I think they might have been first. Yep. Trey Harris, I mentioned him, and they mentioned specifically when talking about him that they were not liking the fact that other teams were, or the draft conversation around Jackson Dart. They were like, stop showing Jackson Dart highlights because we don't want people to notice him. And I always think that there's signal in that. I mean, obviously anybody that a team drafts, they liked, to a degree in the process, but it sounded like they specifically wanted him, like there was something that they thought that they were onto that maybe everybody else wasn't onto. And so I'd like to see what happens in training camp. I don't think I'm going to prioritize drafting him necessarily, but I do think that for part of the reasons that we mentioned, like the wide receiver room is not one that, blows my skirt up. So there's opportunity there. And if we start hearing signal that he's having some really good practices, I think that might be a name that kind of pops onto some like late round drafts.
Right. Yeah. If you like a draft profile, Trey Harris is the one to like. I mean, immensely consistent, even through the transfer up to Ole Miss in terms of receiving Sumer score. And so like, I think he's probably the one to look at on this Chargers team, period. Even in excess of the running backs, particularly as you noted, if you start hearing things out of training camp.
We're still on the C's, so we're going to have to pick up the pace here. We're going to be here all day. The Chiefs, there's nobody here that I'm particularly thrilled about from a fantasy standpoint. I don't think that Jalen Royals can unseat Xavier Worthy, Rashee Rice, or Hollywood Brown to the degree that he would need to in order to become fantasy relevant. So we're going to move on to the Colts and Tyler Warren, who is very interesting because they obviously brought him in with a purpose as a security blanket for Richardson, whose accuracy needs a ton of work, which might be cause for concern as to how valuable Tyler Warren can be for us. But in terms of opportunity, I think it's clearly built into his role there.
Yeah. It's so funny. We talked about Colson Loveland at the top. It's like when, it was Cinco de Mayo yesterday, you have a margarita, you wake up and you rub your eyes and you're like, I probably shouldn't have had a margarita yesterday. That's kind of what this tight end draft is feeling like, because it's like Anthony Richardson's going to push the ball far down the field. That's what Shane Steichen wants to do regardless. Is Tyler Warren going to be the one who is going to be that deep target earner? Like, maybe his great concern is athleticism. Is he going to be able to really do that past 20 yards for you?
Do they need
maybe it's just a tough projection at this point.
Do you think that that's what they want him to do? Be pushing the ball down the field? I know that that's a strength of his. I wonder if that's also not just a signal of an unhealthy offense, that they, did that so frequently and that he was pushing the ball down the field. It's like 3rd and long all the time. And so maybe a Tyler Warren is somebody on early downs who can help keep you out of 3rd and long. And maybe we need to see, his long accuracy needs work too, but his short and intermediate accuracy are we need those to go up dramatically. So maybe they focus on that. Like, if I'm the Colts, this entire offseason has been about huddling up with Anthony Richardson and figuring out the things that he needs to do better. And that feels like that just is like red light flashing. Like, we need to work on the short and intermediate and just in general accuracy. So I would, and then them drafting him for that purpose, I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't hit him a ton.
Yeah. I'm trying to think back to the excellent Jalen Hurts here and what the pieces to that were. And it feels like the excellent Jalen Hurts, going to the Super Bowl, Shane Steichen gets a head coaching job a year, was playing through the wide receivers, and so it's like, it's just, I don't know if I personally would trust Tyler Warren to be a fantasy viable tight end, which is kind of crazy to say, given I also said that about Colson Loveland. And that was kind of the dish on this whole draft to begin with. It's like, it's a deep tight end draft. You're going to be able to get guys in the middle. How much better is Warren and Loveland than everyone else? It's a toss up, at least as the data is concerned. And now that we're reviewing the rosters, Lindsay, that's kind of what it feels like at this point, which is kind of I wouldn't have said the same thing about Dalton Kincaid 2 years ago. Wouldn't have said the same thing about Sam Laporta. Wouldn't have said the same thing about Brock Bowers last year. All those guys felt like they were going to have massive opportunities, which obviously Tyler Warren will probably have a massive opportunity as well. But it's just not the scenario it's not as good of a scenario as what Brock Bowers was set up in. And Brock Bowers didn't even have a quarterback. So it's it's a real kind of tough, I'm not going to call it a tough look. Obviously, they're probably going to be fine players, but it's a real tough fantasy particular projection.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think where in terms of ranking, you don't move him into that tier with those other names that you just mentioned right now, just because you think that there's volume. There might be volume, but is it going to work? Does it play to the quarterback's strength? Not sure. And so it makes it a little bit more complicated. DJ Giddens is a 5th round running back that they drafted there. I don't think that there's an immediate opportunity to get on the field. Jonathan Taylor and Khalil Herbert. So we're not going to spend too much time talking about that. The Commanders, and by the way, there is a tight end. There is a tight end that I think has an immediate chance to get on the field. And it's not one of the names that we talked about in the draft. And we'll get to that at some point here. And I'll highlight that this is the one that I was talking about. But I think there's somebody who checks that box. So the Commanders, Jalen Lane, slot wide receiver, punt returner, maybe immediately. What do you think about him? He's not somebody who pops from a Sumer score standpoint in our metrics. I think. So he's a guy who ran a fast 40 4.34. Our tracking data doesn't suggest that he necessarily plays as fast as that. Like he tested well in vert and broad jump. He feels like a kind of a conundrum to me, because what our tracking data suggests that he did in college doesn't match, like very specifically doesn't match what he did in the athletic testing at the combine. And so I've just got like a big question mark around Jalen Lane.
I think considering how much the Commanders like using the screen, like the outside screen game as kind of like a run game, despite them being like a pretty successful rushing team, makes kind of any of these guys sort of viable, but not someone like I'd put a pin in. I mean, it's even questionable for like Deebo Samuel to a certain degree. It's like he has been the yak guy in terms of the tracking and in terms of, you know, just the actual watching the game. Mm-hmm. And last year we saw production go down. We saw him drop a lot of balls, but if his usage is going to be a ton of very inventive Cliff Kingsbury screens that Jaden Daniels is just nailing him on, then he's going to be an interesting player. But if that's not going to be the profile, then he's not. And so I think a lot of the Commanders wide receivers production is based on how much any single person will get utilized in the screen game outside of probably Terry McLaurin.
Do you think in the case of him, it's enough to be fantasy relevant?
Probably not. Gonna give him the thumbs down on that one. I mean, like De'Ami Brown wasn't super fantasy relevant pretty much at all last year, and it was really like Terry or bust, and maybe Brian Robinson or bust. And I think that's going to probably be the case again this year with a sprinkling or a little, you know, move of target share to Deebo, particularly in the screen and short and intermediate game.
Okay, I'm going to move to the Cowboys. And by the way, I'm going past some guys that were drafted that are offensive weapons. So if you need me to back up at any point because you're like, hey, this guy I think is under the radar and I like him and you didn't mention him, then please do. Cowboys didn't draft a wide receiver. But they did draft 2 running backs. And I think that the opportunity there is massive because I don't like the running backs that they have. Javonte Williams, nope. Miles Sanders, no thank you. And then they've got Jaden Blue out of Texas. They waited till round 5 to take him. And then they waited till round 7 to take the other guy out of Clemson, who's like kind of a power back, Phil Maffa. But Jaden Blue is definitely on my radar as a guy to watch because I think that there is obvious opportunity unless they make some sort of change between now and then to the roster.
Yeah, I'm going to be staring at this running back situation with like my eyelids glued open so I don't miss anything because I think they want to run the ball. I think the entire goal of this draft was, you know, get Tyler Booker in there. We want to run the ball. We want to be a better running team. We want to pick up where we kind of left off last year, even though they ended up being kind of terrible in the aggregate in the running game. And we want to play Cowboys football. And so whoever ends up being the carry earner here, I will immediately try to pick up off the waiver wire because I don't think any of these guys are like really super draftable per se.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good way to phrase it. That you're just like keeping an eye on them, and this is like a waiver wire pickup when somebody pops. I mean, like think about Rico Dowdle last year. Rico Dowdle was fine, you know, like you could definitely play him, but is he one of the guys that you want to prioritize in your draft? And could you find a guy like Rico Dowdle, you know, or have like what's the comp in terms of if you didn't draft him, are you still okay? Like I think that the answer is probably yes, and so I think your approach is probably smart. Dolphins, I'm not seeing anybody that makes sense to me.
So there's a lot of just random players on this that I think could be really interesting, even down into the undrafted free agents. And I think basically what this is a bet on Tua. But looking at the players that they acquired in the offseason, Westbrook-Akine, Theo Weiss out of Missouri, Andrew Armstrong, who Quinn McLean, data scientist here with us at Sumer Sports, really loved out of Arkansas. Ollie Gordon, Alexander Madison. Like, I think all of these guys are interesting. I'm not going to like go out of my way to acquire them in fantasy drafts immediately. But I do think there is a chance that, number one, this offense is going to end up being back in the top of the league in terms of EPA per play, particularly if Tua is healthy. And if that is true, there is going to be guys outside of, you know, the standard fare of Hill, Waddle, Jonnu Smith, and Achane who are going to be relevant. And I'm just not sure which one of these kind of undrafted free agent, down the market draft, et cetera, free agency pickups is going to be the guy. But I think one of them will be.
Okay. Ollie Gordon's another guy who, he averaged 6.1 yards per carry in 2023, which was a better year for him than 2024.
Yeah.
But in terms of our metrics, there's not much that I'm willing to go out on a limb and say that is the guy. So,
right.
It's a wait and see for me. Mm-hmm. Now the Giants with Cam Scattaboo, that one feels interesting behind Tyrone Tracy, who is a guy that I mentioned also popped in our Sumer score in his last year in college and then gets an opportunity in a backfield. Devin Singletary last year. It's Tyrone Tracy and Devin Singletary again this year. Tracy, from a fantasy standpoint, I think was relevant because of the opportunity that he got. But if you zoom out and you look at efficiency metrics, it was not that great. I sometimes will just pull up a bunch of different running back metrics, which you can do at sumersports.com in our data section, and just look at who's at the bottom in all of the different categories and see if there's a trend, and sometimes it's just the offense is not good. And that always affects running back numbers. And so it's hard to know, even with the advanced metrics, how much it says about the running back and how much it says about the environment.
Yeah.
And certainly that's a worthy question to ask about the Giants. But Tracy with 2.84 yards per carry last year and a 33.9% success rate, 5th lowest tackle for loss rate though. Just 6.8, which I actually thought was really interesting. And I wonder if this tells a story about the O-line in some way. Tracy and Singletary both ranked in the top 5 in tackle for loss rate with sub 7%, which is kind of weird, seeing as how the efficiency metrics don't tell a story of they're so good, but they didn't get tackled in the backfield a lot.
Right. Quite the opposite of the Dolphins. It's quite literally the flip side of the coin. Speaking of waking up and rubbing your eyes, I just don't see it for this offense. I just don't see it coming together. And I think it's going to be a lot of neighbors. He's going to have the crazy target share again, and everyone else is going to be downstream. And I think that's just going to be the outline for the Giants this year. I just don't know where I can trust someone outside of Malik Neighbors from the quarterback position, O-line position, tailbacks, and wide receivers.
Well, that's fun. And then in that sense, it would be don't.
I'm happy to be wrong, but
don't drop the running back in that situation.
Yeah.
Who, Cam Scattaboo, again, 4th round guy, was in the 96th percentile run Sumer score, right? So our tracking data suggests that he is a guy that we might want to put on our radar for a project like this. Had 100 plus missed tackles forced. I like him if they're set up to not get tackled in the backfield and he can break tackles. Then this feels like an interesting piece to the puzzle for me. I think he's an interesting guy in the way that so is he an upgrade from Tyrone Tracy? Maybe he might be an upgrade from Tyrone Tracy. And if he's in the backfield taking over those reps and he's an upgrade from him, then I kind of think that he is at least a playable fantasy, because you're painting a picture of an offense you're not excited about, but also same from last year. Right. So at least you have Malik to stretch the field. You have Russell who can get him the ball on the sideline.
Yeah. You're doing a good job of convincing me to reverse my opinion.
Okay. I like that.
Because the underrated part of this is that Cam Scatterby was also excellent in the passing game. And so, I'm just thinking as you went through that, and it's making a lot of sense. This is a team that's not they're not going to get great, push. This isn't the Eagles here, but if you have a guy who can break tackles, who can be relevant in the passing game, plus you add it with a passing game that's probably going to get funneled to one player and then probably figure it out after that, particularly if someone like Wilson or Jackson Dart plays, then I could see Scattaboo or Tracy being interesting, down, especially as the season moves along. So now I'm kind of reversing my opinion, because you bring up you bring up a great point. If Scattaboo does get the reps, he has been good, and in college he was good in the passing game, and so the two-way I think I'm more excited about the two-way ability of him than just the running.
Yeah.
But if he's able to be an option in the passing game, that would, like, if we, again, like if we start hearing about that week 1, week 2 of camp or the preseason, then I will probably like get excited, try to make him a late round pickup.
I'm totally putting you on the spot. I don't know the answer here. How is he as a pass blocker?
So, I mean, like he was everything for the team. Like he was the entire Arizona State offense to a certain level. The quarterback was pretty good. The quarterback is Sam Leavitt is getting looks next year, but he's not going to be like a first round guy unless he ends up crazily winning the Heisman. So he can kind of be trusted to do a little bit of everything. His usage was just like so crazy high in general, though, particularly like if you watch that Texas game, I mean, it was like Cam Scattaboo is touching the ball every single time. And so it'll be interesting to see how it progresses to the NFL level where it's an entirely different beast.
Yeah.
But, you know, Brian Daboll is going to put him in a position to succeed if he indeed is the guy over Tracy from last year. And it's interesting, like, just to see how they approach this, because Tyrone Tracy was also a guy that had a lot of like pass game upside as well, like coming in at being a former wide receiver and everything like that. So it is an interesting, I'm intrigued. I will say I am now intrigued as of the last 2 minutes. I'm intrigued by the backfield of the Giants. No.
Okay. Jaguars are interesting in that Travis Hunter, they get wide receiver 1 in the draft, but he goes to a place with a pretty good wide receiver 1 in VTJ. So what do his targets look like? What does his role look like? Is he playing offense? Is he playing a little bit of offense, but mostly defense? Like, we don't really know what his role is going to be there, which makes it really hard to talk about how to draft him in fantasy at this moment. But let's assume that he plays wide receiver for purposes of this conversation. Let's assume that that comes out. What do you think it looks like there?
I think you'd put a similar trust in his volume as you'd put like Chris Godwin last year going into the year. Okay. And so like, let's take away the injuries, even though like, frankly,
totally
like the Chris Godwin injury stuff is probably similar to the Travis Hunter. Is he going to play a ton of defensive snap stuff? So like kind of the same there, but I think that's the volume projection that you're probably looking at to a certain degree of like wide receiver 2, but kind of the first option quite a bit. Particularly if he's going to be a wide receiver first, is the way that I would approach it. Obviously that's a really high projection for a rookie, but I think that's probably the opportunity that he will be afforded, at least in the preseason and camp.
So he's somebody we'll have to follow the news with regards to him, and then project in a high-end wide receiver 2 situation in an offense and what we think that looks like. What about the running back situation? There is an obvious opportunity to upgrade off of ETN in particular, who ranked 41st last year in yards per carry, 35th in yards after contact per attempt, 29th in success rate, 35th in tackle for loss rate, 25th in explosive rate, 32nd in first down rate. It just like it all fell off a cliff for ETN last year. There's also Bigsby. They drafted a couple of running backs here. How do you see the backfield playing out?
I think Bigsby is probably the play if you want to get involved in the Jaguars backfield. The grand problem though is like 2 years ago, Travis Etienne was like a guy that was popping and winning people leagues. And so if he can, I know he like missed a couple games due to injury. Obviously also did Bigsby. Bigsby was like quite elusive 2 years ago. Then last year was like a pretty productive guy, like not like tipping into the running back 1, top 32 type Sumer scores. So I think like my head is telling me that Bigsby's probably the direction you want to go if it ends up, coming down to it, particularly like middle, late rounds, running back 2 flex play. But Etienne's a wild card, man. Like if he has another great year, it's gonna be great because he just has that big play ability that very few running backs do have. Unfortunately, I have seen it in person. So like I saw it at a young age and in person, and it translated all the way up to the NFL. So if he can get it back, which I'm not confident is the case, it's rare that we see tailbacks like get that juice back. I mean, Josh Jacobs, I guess, is kind of the guy who did it, but Josh Jacobs is like an entirely different player, real big guy, power back. So I think Bigsby's probably the play here. I don't know outside of Hunter whether I'd really trust any rookies in on this team.
Okay. And now that brings us to the Jets. And this is where the maybe playable fantasy tight end comes into the conversation for me, in Mason Taylor, who I think was drafted into a likely starting role.
Yep.
The Jets' new offensive coordinator was the Lions' passing game coordinator. Tight end was a big part of the Lions' offense. It's a smart way to help Fields, give him a safety blanket. Can he hit that safety blanket? I think we've established that he can, since that was our conversation for Anthony Richardson and Tyler Warren. Am I weird that I kind of like Mason Taylor in fantasy?
Lindsay, we've talked so much about tight ends and our thoughts on tight ends, and like you're like typical, the way that you've approached it typically, and correct me if I'm wrong here, has been like, I actually think that tight ends can be viable year one. And then my piggyback off of that is we just don't know which tight ends it is. I think in this case, it's coming off the back of my thoughts on Loveland and Warren. Like, I think he's just going to get a lot of targets. Like, I think this is going to be a running offense, particularly that has a lot of design runs for the quarterbacks, which means there's going to be RPOs at play. And when RPOs are at play, tight ends over the middle are in play. And I think Mason Taylor comes from an offense that Nussmeier ran last year, Jaden Daniels ran 2 years ago, and I think it's just a perfect fit. And it really shows like the conundrum of the tight end position in this draft, because he was the third tight end off the board, goes off the board in day 2, and he is slated, or at least has the opportunity, is afforded the opportunity to potentially be a year 1 impact player, which is, you know, he was technically tight end 3. So it's very interesting how it's all played out.
Whew, he might be a good, because my guess is he's not gonna be in the conversation from an ADP standpoint, where we're looking at Warren and Loveland, who are going in that order, by the way. Like, you know, Warren is going a couple of rounds before Loveland, and then so Mason Taylor feels like a guy you might be able to get in a late round, honestly, unless something dramatic changes narratively between now and then. But I think that feels like a throw at the dartboard that I actually kind of can get behind. Arian Smith is a speed guy, wide receiver. I would put him on my like sleeper to watch list, because I don't like the Jets wide receivers outside of Garrett Wilson. I mean, they've got Josh Reynolds, they have Alan Lazard. It's not like they're just desperately, you know, clamoring for people to take their spots, but I wouldn't say that those spots are untakeable outside of Garrett Wilson. And so just, you know, keeping an eye on that. The Lions drafted 2 wide receivers who played primarily in the slot in college, which I just think is an interesting note. I don't have any interest whatsoever in fantasy in them immediately, but what do you think that means strategically for them? Because that spot is taken unless they're going to move him.
So I think my general thought on the Lions offense more generally is that we're going to see a lot more screen game than we did in previous years. And as a result, like, I'm heavily considering when it's all said and done, whether Jahmyr Gibbs is like the top player in fantasy this year. I think he has the profile to do so. And then you add in the idea that they're probably going to move to a little bit more Broncos-esque system that involves the running backs in the passing game a little bit more than they were last year, which, you know, for Jahmyr Gibbs is like a meaningful amount. And I think there's a real argument that this offense is going to look slightly different. Obviously, the same notes of playing through the offensive line, Jared Goff over the middle. But I think there's a real shot that Jahmyr Gibbs is the best player in fantasy this year, bar none.
Yeah. I am in the process of drafting a fantasy team right now. That is for a Fantasy Cares Eliminator League, which has real weird scoring, and I won't get into it. But it fell to me in a spot where I wanted to pivot off of the quarterbacks And I was like, okay, do I take the best running back now? And I really thought long and hard about taking Jahmyr Gibbs instead of Saquon Barkley. But then I pulled the trigger for Saquon Barkley and just said, like, let's be done with it. But I actually think that that's a conversation I'm going to have a lot between now and most of my fantasy drafts, where the scoring is more traditional. Jahmyr is a guy. Yeah. And by the way, that might just also be like if you end up with an ADP that is more toward the mid to late first round, like you might have crushed it, because that might be exactly where you get Jahmyr Gibbs unless something changes. And I think that that's a really good first round pick. Packers, Matthew Golden. Is he the target earner who separates in this wide receiver room? I'm not 100% sure. And I know this is one of the biggest questions we have to answer for fantasy, because there is an opportunity there for, like what I said, I wanted them to do this offseason. They kind of on the surface did it, was go draft a target earner. I don't know that I'm like, he's it. And so, like, is he so different from the other wide receivers that they have there? That's where my brain can't quite unlock this and try and figure out how, if he didn't just walk into a situation that is as muddy as last year's wide receiver situation was in Green Bay, or did he clarify it and he is the guy now to come out of there?
I think by rule now, I'm just not going to trust Packers wide receivers, and it's tough, but like I mean, they got so many of them. They got like 6 guys that are going to get targets, or at least like get snaps. Like the fact that I'm having to break this down to like who will be getting the just sheer number of snaps is from a fantasy perspective is not like a sign of grand trust here. And so you're talking about like Jaden Reed, good wide receiver, probably better than Matthew Golden. You're talking about, Wicks and Dobbs and Musgrave and all these other players. And it's just like, I don't see how Golden threads the needle here to end up being, even a playable wide receiver in at least this year in fantasy.
You just said Reed probably better than Golden. I think that's like where the heart of this whole conversation has to come out of. If you think that, then the answer is probably not. Then the answer is probably this is not. But also, if you think that, why did they draft him there? You know what I mean? Like, that's where you draft a guy who is clearly your number one wide receiver. And so it's possible they view him as being better than Reed. And that's how they'll plug him into the offense and he will earn those opportunities. I don't know.
And what confounds us even more is like they also drafted Sevion Williams.
Yeah.
And so
in the third. Right. Like that's not even like a late round relative to where all the other wide receivers that we're going to talk about are getting taken. Like, oh, damn it.
It's tough.
That's not what I want. I feel like I'm in the minority a little bit. I feel like when I start opening up, and again, maybe not, maybe I'm an idiot and you guys have been reading all this fantasy stuff and you're like, that's what everyone's saying. I feel like we're going to be in the minority here. I feel like people are going to like Matthew Golden from a fantasy standpoint because of where he was drafted. Yeah. And the fact that like they haven't drafted a wide receiver in the first round since, and it's the first time ever, and yay, he's the dude. I just don't know if that's what the eval says. So we'll see.
Look, I'm
that's good analysis, right? We'll see.
As always, like strong beliefs held weakly or whatever. Like be willing to move off, but hold the core idea strongly. Like I just don't see it as currently slated. I just don't see it.
Oh, Packers fans are going to send us evil messages. They're going to be so mad at us. We won't push this out as the clip for this episode.
Well, and here, yeah, and here's,
I'm not trying to go viral with a.
And this isn't an attack on their offense. It's just an attack on how the offense may work out. Like I think that Golden could have like a median, like could perform to expectations. So like as a sort of like a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, and that could be an excellent addition for this offense. but it's
Yes,
not going to be good for,
yes.
you know, your Saquon Barkley led fantasy team.
Yeah. Okay. And now we go to the Panthers where Tet went. By the way, are we not allowed to call him Tet? Like, what's that all about? I've seen people jump into comments and say, like, okay, just not to be that person, but it's either T-Mac or Teteroa. It's not Tet. And I don't understand why. And he's not allowed to be T-Mac. T-Mac's taken. Like, that one's weird. No, you don't get to just like burst onto the scene in 2025 and be like, I'm T-Mac. No. So, and I'm not going to call you Teteroa. Like, I think I'm going to call you Tet. Like, where is the problem stemming from here? Like, I need to understand this.
I was totally, I have no clue that this discourse was going on. And as being the guy who likes saying really hard names, I've always been a Teteroa McMillan guy. So it's like,
okay.
You know, I was unaware of this. Speaking of like, now that all the dust is, yeah, that's fair. Speaking of all of the dust being settled, Teteroa McMillan could potentially have like 25% target share on this team. Like
100. Absolutely. I've got him number 2 on my rookie draft list. It goes Ashton Ginty, Teteroa. I'll say his whole name. McMillan. Number 2.
Yeah.
Because
like
they did use draft capital. They used it on him. He is walking into a wide receiver 1 role in that offense. And there's also opportunity for that. Right? Like, it's not just like, hey, we use draft capital, but gosh, we've got a lot of other guys here. Like, he's the dude. He's the dude.
Yeah. It's very funny because on the face of the profile, particularly when he was going to go to I'm not going to say the Panthers are, you know, a god tier offense, but they're a more settled offense than many of the early drafting teams, I'd say. My eval thoughts on him going into the draft was like, okay, not Mike Evans, probably more like T. Higgins, probably more of a career wide receiver 2, which is all borderline hilarious as well. Cause I have in writing, I was like, I'd pay T. Higgins to be my wide receiver 1, but all like that eval sticks now that he's with the Panthers. Is like, is he going to be the highest level wide receiver 1 on earth? Probably not. Is he going to be a certified wide receiver 1? I am intrigued. I think that perhaps could happen. I think he could be an excellent target for Bryce Young. And I think this could end up being the best pick of the draft. I think like if all works, this could end up being the best pick of the draft by far.
Like in the real draft?
In the real draft. Wait. In the NFL 2025 NFL draft.
That's what I'm saying. Like you're not talking about fantasy drafts where you're going to get a ton of value. You're saying like him going 8 overall might end up being the best pick of the draft.
I think now that the dust has settled, the stage is set for that to occur. Like there's a real chance that this Panthers team wins 8, 9, 10 games this year. And if that does occur, it's because their defense progresses, their offense is the same, and they have a target earner. And the fact that item 3 is they have a target earner, and that's Teteroa McMillan, sets that up to be a potential extremely high value selection by the Panthers in this draft.
All right. I like the passion about this particular.
We're an hour and 22 in, and I'm like just getting fired up about this.
Okay, I'm revved up now. There you go. I've built myself into this take. I like it. I like it. And I definitely like him for fantasy. And I think he has a huge role, obviously. The other piece here that I think is kind of
I think we lost Lindsay. But, you know, let's just keep it going with the Panthers. It's going to be really interesting to see how they progress with Bryce Young, because it's like, here you have a team who was like very poor at the beginning of the year last year. Then all of a sudden they start progressing more into a team that can run the ball, a team that can throw the ball as it continued. And the real weakness was the wide receiver position. So I think Tet McMillan could end up being, you know, a pretty good player. So let me go with the teams. I got to pull it up because I had it by division. Let's just keep it in division, or you know what? We'll keep rolling through as we had it in alphabetical order as we, you know, keep chiming in, and we'll roll through some of the teams that are, you know, maybe not as exciting just based on what's going on, like a team like the Ravens, maybe, like the Ravens, I think they're just going to be, and Lindsay's back as I'm like, talking BS about the Ravens, but like,
are you stalling?
Lindsay,
we're not on R
just,
yet.
Sorry. I know. Well, I had it pulled up by division, so I was just trusting you to know alphabetical order, and then I couldn't find it in alphabetical order, so I was like, let's get to some teams that I know Lindsay doesn't have strong thoughts about, like the Ravens, because the Ravens just have Lamar Jackson, and that's what's.
Well, I mean, I have strong feelings about the Ravens from a fantasy standpoint, just not the rookies. Like I literally wrote Ravens, none. No.
Yeah.
No thoughts there. Before my Wi-Fi completely failed me here, I'm curious to know where you lost me. Did you get any of my Mitchell Evans thoughts?
No, I did not. I would love to hear them though, because I was not expecting to hear the name Mitchell Evans, who was a good tight end, did great work in Notre Dame, but I was not expecting, especially with the Panthers.
So, well, why especially with the Panthers? That's why I have any kind of thoughts about Mitchell Evans.
Well, what are the thoughts?
So the thoughts are, this is a lot of buildup to getting the thoughts out of my mouth. This is, again, and I've said over and over again, there are names that I would put in like a sleeper list to watch during training camp because I have potential opportunity. Mitchell Evans is a guy who they drafted at tight end, and he sits behind Tommy Tremble and Jatavian Sanders.
Yep.
And I mean, I think if you attach, which we do for a lot of these guys, all of the unknown upside that we can attach to every rookie draft pick, right? Like, who knows? They might hit the ground in training camp and totally outplay their draft position, just look incredible. That's always on the table. I think that, you're going into a tight end room that is not unbeatable. So I'll just put him on that list at the very bottom of to watch in training camp.
Very, very fair. I do not know if I share those thoughts, but I, as a result, will be keeping a close eye, because I just think
because you like Tommy Tremble or Jatavian Sanders, or you don't think that they will prioritize tight end play in this offense, or what is it? Or you don't like him?
I think he's a good player. I just wonder whether the opportunity is there given what they kind of like to do.
Okay.
And so, like, you think of Tommy Tremble, also, speaking of which, now that I'm thinking about it, two Notre Dame tight ends. Like, Tremble's more of that kind of guy that gets moved around a lot. And as a result, like, I just think he's going to get that snap share. And then Sanders is more of like a pass catcher. And I think Evans is more of like kind of a do it, like he's going to line up in line, block and receive. And I just don't know what the mix of those three guys are. And so I think it'll end up being two. And if I were to put bets on it being two, it would be Sanders and Tremble. So I think there's definitely an opportunity for him to be if he plays well in camp, there's a real argument that he could just like end up being, their 11 personnel guy. And given that this is a team that, ranked 4th in 11 personnel last year, it is like relevant to a certain degree, especially if he can do it all. So I once again, I'm talking myself into your take, because it's like, well, Tremble's not going to really do that. And then also to a certain degree, Sanders isn't going to like be really hammering people in the run game. So maybe I think there's an opportunity for him to beat people out. I don't know if there's just an opportunity there for him day one, though, if that makes sense.
Trevor Etienne, this is an interesting landing spot, Carolina, for him because of Chuba, who has been great and just got a new contract. He's a guy, though, that did pop in our Sumer score metrics. 94th percentile rush, 93rd percentile, 93.6, so 94th percentile in 2023 also. So consistently playing in that range in college. I don't necessarily see an opportunity for him immediately, but I tell you what, if Chuba goes down, like that might be the handcuff back. That might be where you go from a fantasy standpoint. I think where you want to handcuff are guys that you're drafting somewhat high. And if And if they go down, the opportunity for somebody to take that exact role exists. And I think that this might be the definition of that.
Yeah. And you think of how Canales approached it in Tampa, even though that run game was not good when he was in Tampa. And it was like, typically they were rotating in multiple backs. And I wonder if there's like a Rashad White role that can be carved out by Trevor Etienne. But the question remains is like, what does Jonathan Brooks look like in this offense? You know, like struggled with injury coming in, struggled with injury coming out. So I think she's a wild card as well.
But don't we kind of know to a degree since they drafted another running back? Or no? You think like
it's a great point, and it's difficult at the running back position to recover from injury. So I think, I think for a team that wants to run the ball, which is the Panthers, for a team that has the offensive line to run the ball, which is also the Panthers, I think you just try to have as good of an approach as you can at that running back position. So it's definitely something to keep a close eye on. I think less similar to Mitchell Evans, more similar to like some of the guys that we were talking about earlier, in that like the spot is kind of open if he wants to earn it, particularly as it pertains to the like pass catching running back type guy, I think.
Patriots, speaking of running back, there's one there that we need to talk about. Talking about our Sumer score metric. He is the I think the guy with the best profile from a Sumer score standpoint, Travion Henderson, with a 97% run score in our database. But he goes somewhere with Ramondre Stevenson, and that then becomes my big question mark. Is like Ramondre wasn't. How does he fit with Ramondre in your mind?
So it's probably like lower probability, but I'm going to lean into it more. I think Trey Henderson just might be the guy. He might be the running back from this draft. Like I think bar none, I think the opportunity is there with this offense, particularly given the way that, Vrabel likes to play power football. I think that the rebuilt offensive line is there. I think there is a world in which this offense is not good again, but Henderson gets a lot of opportunities. And I think like it's I think you can make a real case, as you noted, Lindsay, that Travion Henderson is just the guy and is just going to end up being the running back from this draft.
Whew. Very interesting. Do you, okay. So we'll be sure to keep an eye on that. That'll be a big storyline, I think, either way, right? Like it's going to be a big storyline. Everyone is going to wonder how these two fit together and whether or not it becomes like an overtake or a shared backfield with different roles.
Right.
So if it's pointing us in the direction of it being his backfield, then obviously what do you do with that? Like how high do you move him up if it's his backfield? Where do you start thinking? I mean, I know you're not looking at like an ADP of running backs at the moment, so it's hard to even say what kind of range you're going to put him. But then there's a projection about the offense that's taking place. I think the offense will be better than it was last year, but to what degree?
Yeah. I think you can make a real case that he could potentially be like a top tier running back too in this league if all goes right. Given the potential opportunity, given the way that we think this offense is going to run, given the fact that they've rebuilt the offensive line, and given the fact that, like Ramondre and Antonio Gibson are guys that have been fantasy relevant, but like there's the reason they've been fantasy relevant is because that team has been awful. And so I think like the agenda is out there. The agenda is set. And I think there's a real chance, as you noted, if we start hearing about this in fantasy, that I'd be willing to, really, really prioritize getting him on my fantasy team.
I'm looking at NFFC ADPs right now. So this is high stakes sort of expert drafts ADPs. And I'm looking at the ones that have taken place only since the draft ended. So we're looking at like a week and a half worth of drafts, I think, if my math is correct. And in terms of rookies, we're seeing, and forgive me, so Ashton Jinty's going in the first round. And then we've got in the 5th round, Hampton and RJ Harvey. And then in the 6th round, we've got Judkins, who we haven't talked about yet. Wait, no, we did. And well, we said stay away from Cleveland. So they're not staying away from him. He's going at the top of the 6th round. And then they've got Travion Henderson like toward the end of the 6th round. So that might be a good value pick for you if you're able to get him there. Or maybe even a little bit before then, seeing as how you value him more than some of the other guys that we've talked about.
Yep.
Okay, what about the wide receiver room? Kyle Williams. I could see him being heavily involved immediately or not, right? Like you've got Diggs, you've got Matt Collins, you've got Demario Douglas. It could be those 3 guys. They still have Kendrick Bourne. They have Kayshon Boutte. I always struggle with how to say his name. Jalen Polk and Javon Baker, who I have way too many shares of in late dynasty drafts that I made from last year, thinking one of them's got to be good. Turns out, nope, no, they don't. So I kind of feel like that one's open, but I think I like Kyle Williams, and I think I like him as maybe being able to. Matt Collins feels like somebody who maybe, ideally, you could knock off the field.
I thought deeply about this, and it feels like it's Williams or Diggs. And I mean, Diggs is getting up there in age and it has been injured. And so, like, do I think Williams is relevant? Yes. The problem is like, what does relevant look like in this Patriots offense? And I just don't know if relevant in this Patriots offense is like really enough to move the needle at the wide receiver position in particular.
You think it's him or Diggs?
In terms of the fantasy perspective, yeah.
Not into like he doesn't take Diggs' spot on the field, knock him off.
No.
In fantasy, it's one of those 2. Okay,
yeah.
I thought you were saying something totally different, and okay, yeah. No, I could see that. Demario Douglas was pretty heavily targeted last year.
Yep.
But I think that was almost a by default situation, right?
Yeah, and I think that's where my fears about this offense more generally and what it means for a fantasy relevant wide receiver come in. It's like if Bourne and Douglas were like the guys and they didn't really cross the radar, I do worry a little bit about like the upside of a Diggs or Williams or a Hollins.
Okay, fair enough. Raiders, Ashton Genty, draft him early.
Yeah, I just think he's going to get an unprecedented amount of volume.
Yeah.
What the impact is going to actually be on the win column, I don't know, but I think he's going to be toting the rock quite a bit.
Yeah, we're not going to give you any kind of like outlier fantasy analysis positions on Ashton Genty. No. I think you guys know what to do with him. Jack Besh. Wait.
No, Besh is right. Yeah, okay. Yeah. You hit Boutte and you hit Besh, 2 Louisiana names. So
there you go. Primarily a slot guy until this past season. They moved him out wide 72% of the time. Prior to that, 76% slot, 96% slot, 66% slot. Tight end size, slot moves. Like he's a really interesting weapon because I think they could line him up in a bunch of different positions as just established. And Jacoby Myers is also a guy who can play out wide or in the slot. Trey Tucker feels like the expendable starter there for me. But that's even after putting Jack Besh on the field. So I think Jack Besh is a guy who might actually be kind of an interesting piece there. But then you also have to think, like you said earlier, in terms of what priority weapon are you? So now you've got Genty. We're going to run the ball a ton. You've got Bowers. We're obviously going to throw to him a ton. Jacoby Myers is established, whether he's not your idea of like a high-end wide receiver one, he's established that he can play his role in this offense well, right? So I don't know if Besh slots in under him in terms of priority. I kind of tend to think so. And then what does that mean in terms of the opportunity he has to score fantasy points?
Yeah, I think like going back to the discussion about Tetero and McMillan, like I would have felt a lot better about a player of that caliber drafted, but just because like you think about Geno, right? And people love him. He was extremely accurate. His like completion percentage over expected probably made DK look really great last year. DK Metcalf from the Seattle Seahawks, now Steelers. And like, there's an argument that this offense could actually be like okay, like a median to above average.
Yeah.
Especially given that Geno played behind a pretty poor offensive line last year. Now, it does seem that they actually trust in the progression of this offensive line, at least from a institutional perspective. But all that being said, Brock Bowers' target share, I don't see that going down. Like the fact that he was able to maintain that target share and be effective last year, it would imply that he will continue to get that target share. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah,
it's very difficult, as you noted, to like jump through the hoop of saying, okay, well, we have Geno, he's going to complete passes. Oh, he's going to target Brock Bowers less. I don't see that happening.
No, not at all. But Jack Besh, I think, is an interesting piece that can make the offense better.
I do. Yeah. I think they have a lot of young wide receivers that could make this better. Tommy Millott, Dante Thornton, like they really went after it in late rounds at the wide receiver position, which I think was an interesting approach, but probably the correct approach to this draft. If you like really parse out the different tiers of players and where the availability was.
This is an offense where I think I get hung up on, because I was okay with them taking Ashton Jeanty, but I wasn't okay with the Jaguars taking Ashton Jeanty one spot ahead of them when that became a conversation point in the week building up to the draft. And I am trying to like be honest with myself about whether or not that has to do with like a built-in bias, or if there's something that I can defend. If there's a defendable take there about why I think that the Raiders are maybe closer in my mind offensively. Like, I just think that the pieces, I could see ways that the pieces work together in a way where this offense is much better than it was last year. And I think that getting the run game going is dramatically important for them because it was so terrible last year, right? So I think there's an assumption happening in my brain, like you alluded to, that they kind of seem like they co-signed in terms of their draft and offseason approach, that the offensive line will just get better working together, with more reps.
Which
I don't hate it.
Yeah, I'm kind of worried about that. Like I didn't love the pick. In order to have
Wait, which pick did you not like?
The Jeanty pick from the Raiders.
Okay.
In order to have like the level that from a cap perspective you need to him to perform, you have to have like a top 5, top 10 offensive line.
Yeah.
And they do not have that as far as I'm concerned. They were awful in the run game. The flip side of that is if Geno is effective, I think it's going to be a lot easier to run the ball. And so there's like two sides of the coin, but I'm not going to say I'm going to stay away from Ashton Jeanty, but like I'm a little concerned about like what he's actually
does he become Bijan Robinson player, where the talent is undeniable, but how much does it move the needle? How much opportunity is there for you to like really, because you're not in a particularly great offense? I think it might be an interesting comp. And certainly in terms of draft capital, I think it's an interesting comp, right? Like Bijan has not turned the Falcons' losses into wins. He just hasn't.
Yeah. And moreover, he hasn't been like incredibly efficient, which is problematic. And so like,
but is that related to the offense that you put him in? Like, because this goes to the Saquon argument from, Saquon is last year with the Giants, totally different numbers than Saquon in year one with the Eagles, which is the whole running back conversation that we keep having that people just don't want to hear because they really like the best player at a position to be valued as such. And I understand that. Right. But like Saquon in his last year, Josh Jacobs in his last year with the Raiders, right? Like I was wondering if he'd fallen off the cliff. I was wondering if the age cliff had come for him and he's young. But like, are we thinking about that with Etienne in Jacksonville? Like these metrics for running backs, it's so hard to track what's the running back and what is the offense. And so clearly there's some stickiness with regard to the offense affecting the way that the running back looks, which would make sense that you could take a very good running back and have him look like a good running back.
Right.
In a lesser offense.
You're talking about Bijan, and it's really interesting because like 3rd in rush yards last year during the regular season, and then 5th in EPA like total EPA. And I just give you those rankings and you're like, great, that was probably a great pick. But then like add on the caveat that he was like 300 to 400 yards under Saquon and Derrick Henry, which both of them had really, really excellent years. So sidebar there, but like he was 30 lower than like the top guys. Like he's in a completely different tier than the best running backs. And then you move on to EPA per rush, and it's just like a different story when you filter on our website for, on consumersports.com for guys with like 100 rushes. Like now you're starting to get into sixth, and he's well below Gibbs and Henry and Barkley. And what do Gibbs and Henry to a certain degree and Barkley have in common, and Bucky Irving as well? Great offensive lines, great tackles. And so it's just like, what can you really expect year one from Ashton Jeanty is outside of just his sheer usage. Like, I don't know if I can expect that much.
Well, I wonder if, and maybe this is going to go in a direction that disproves the point but I'm just thinking out loud. I wonder if having a running back of this caliber leads to more rush attempts than you would otherwise give somebody in an offense that isn't moving the ball consistently. And therefore then he can do well, but like rush EPA per play is very different than a pass EPA per play. And so are you prioritizing the run game in a way that overall is actually hurtful to your team because you're giving them the ball so much because you were like, playing the odds that one of these is going to be a breakout, but so many of them are not. And even if they are successful relative to running back attempts, if maybe taking the ball out of the quarterback's hands is not great.
Yeah. And that discussion, I think, is so closely linked to Geno's performance. And the wild card here, which we haven't talked about, is Chip Kelly. And if Chip Kelly comes in and does the innovative things that he does and is able to, win on scheme, this does change the face of this conversation, which I think it's a real wild card that people probably aren't considering when it comes to Ashton Jeanty's projection, is like how closely tied that is to Chip Kelly's performance as an offensive coordinator.
All right, we're on the R's now. Continuing this conversation, we've already said for the Ravens that there's nobody worth talking about from a rookie fantasy standpoint. Do you think there's anyone worth talking about on the Rams in that regard? I kind of tend to think maybe not.
The only person that I think could be relevant is Terrence Ferguson, just because it's clear that they wanted to address the tight end position. The problem, as we've noted, is you have to go through Devontae and Puka and Kyron, two of which, all three of which have been top tier fantasy players at their position, and two of which were top tier fantasy players at their position last year. And so I think when you have to dig through those guys, given how much they play 11 personnel, it is going to be a little tougher for Terrence Ferguson, but I think there is a case that he could be an added weapon to that offense.
I think you actually are the point. You made the point to me that made me land on not necessarily. I think I see it in their case as more of a depth piece because as you pointed out to me, we were texting back and forth about this, that they run so much 11 personnel.
Yep.
This is like the most in the league 2 years in a row. Right. And so they need that tight end to be on the field, and they've had injuries at the tight end position, and they have Higbee. He's got 1 year left on his deal. So I think that this could just check two boxes. And one is we will have someone who we feel competent in that role, which is necessary for all of this 11 that we want to run and prioritize. Yep. And then also when Higbee's contract is up in a year, and then we have somebody that we can just slot right into that role. But it's not necessarily like the ball goes through the tight end or we're going to increase 12 or anything like that. So, and I think that that's smart roster building, to plan for the future and plan for the depth. And I think that they maybe in some ways have the luxury to do that. I think I've settled on looking at him in that way.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And it also, as you were talking about that, it brings up the point that he could be an interesting dynasty, selection for rookie drafts.
Yeah. Although, is he ever going to be like a Brock Bowers level, or is he just going to be a playable asset? Like Higbee's never been. I mean, he's a guy you can play, but like he's not going to win you your league, and he might, in fact, be a position that you need to upgrade from time to time.
Yep.
I don't know. Kanata Mumfield is a guy that I kind of like. Again, just because they drafted him and it's late, I think Tutu Atwell feels like a spot on the roster in the starting lineup that feels like Tutu isn't the answer. Like he's been there for a while and he's never been utilized at the rate that it just feels like a spot that could be upgraded potentially. Or else I think we would have seen more from him to this point. I'm not saying Kanata is that guy at all, but I'm just saying like they took him. He's another wide receiver that to just keep an eye on. Maybe. Saints. I don't want him in fantasy, but I think Tyler Shuck is going to play this year. And I think he's probably going to play like after Cam. He might be, if I'm looking at rookie quarterback rankings only for 2025, I might go Cam and then Tyler Shuck. And then not in Dynasty. In Dynasty, I would prioritize Jalen Milroe. Jalen Milroe is the guy that I want, but I don't necessarily see him on the field immediately.
Right.
Tyler Shuck feels like a guy that they might have drafted with the idea that they need a body this year. And if he turns out to be great. And if not, then I think that they're getting a relatively high floor rookie who is older, experienced. The phrase that everybody uses to describe him, even in the draft buildup, is maybe pro ready. Like he's the guy who could maybe mentally and in terms of experience, like just step into the role and maybe the floor doesn't bottom out. He's not in completely over his head. Maybe the ceiling is low, replaceable in the future, but gives you a starter for a year. And I don't know that that's a terrible pick where they took him. If you're looking at it that way.
I would be, if it were just me with the information I have right now, I would start Spencer Rattler. Now, all of the points that you made are very correct. And I don't know. I don't know. Like I don't have a lot of words on this one. Like I think when you say he's a high floor, I think the reason why he's high floor is because he's probably going to limit negative plays. And I think if that's what they're seeking out, he's probably more playable than Spencer Rattler as a result.
Okay.
I wouldn't consider him to be high floor in the case of like someone who can go out there and make plays a la like a Brock Purdy or someone like that, like a guy that's played a lot and you know that he can make plays and you'll deal with like kind of the downsides of it.
It's funny. They're friends.
Yeah. That's a great
picture.
Point.
Brock Purdy looks 12.
Yeah. 4-year veteran Brock Purdy is buddies with rookie Tyler Shuck. But anyway, like, we'll see what happens. I think adding a quarterback to this team was necessary and they did it. And we'll see how it turns out. But as it stands now, I don't say I would be shocked, but as it stands now, like I personally would expect that Spencer Rattler is trotting out there week 1.
Okay. Devin Neal, 6th round running back. I'm only noting him as that, like, keep an eye. If it's good, it feels like there's future opportunity here. Kamara getting up there in age and also his efficiency metrics coming down, although that's not going to affect us in fantasy because they're going to give him the ball so much. Kendre Miller, I guess the doghouse is gone, so maybe he is standing in his way, but it feels like there could be an opportunity here at some point. So that's just a name that I'm like, I'm going to file away look for training camp updates. Seahawks. I think there's some interesting pieces here. And the first of which is Torrey Holton. I think that he's a guy 96th percentile Sumer score for us. Yeah. I think there's a chance just looking at the roster and taking Torrey Horton out of the equation, the depth chart, I think there's a chance to get ahead of MVS. The other spots are Cooper Kupp and JSN. I think Torrey Horton could be an interesting piece to this offensive puzzle next year.
So it's going to be really interesting to see what this offense looks like. I think they're going to run the ball a ton. So the question belays, like, who are going to be the options here? And I think you think about like kind of what Kubiak did last year, and it's really kind of a similar setup without the top tier asset, which would be Alvin Kamara. And so you look at like what New Orleans did last year with Kubiak, and you're seeing the 6th most 12 personnel. And so basically Horton has to be one of those 3 guys on the field, it seems like. And it seems like, as you noted, he has the opportunity to. I'd also consider in that fight, to a certain degree, Ricky White. But Valdez-Scantling did play well for Kubiak last year. So I could definitely see it. I think the Cup and the MVS positions are more up for grabs, as you noted. But I wouldn't like immediately project either of those 2 rookies like to take that spot immediately, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I think they could though.
Yeah.
So I think.
Well, and the other thing is like, they're going to have to block a lot because like that's clearly why they got Cooper Kupp, because they want him to block. And so we'll see how it ends up turning out, particularly given how that offense is going to end up looking. But,
do you think Cooper Kupp?
I'm going to be fascinated by this.
Do you think Cooper Kupp is limited to specific routes at this stage of his career?
Probably so. Yeah, I'd say so. The difference though is I feel like he's going to be in motion a ton, because Kubiak does run a ton of motion, and so that is kind of, it's going to be interesting to see how that progresses. I will also note that there are some other rookies that are catching my eye. Elijah Arroyo at the tight end position, I think may have some juice. And I also think Damian Martinez at the tailback position is also going to be interesting. I know that Charbonnet and Walker have been like trusted more by previous staffs, but I do think there's an opportunity for Martinez to start getting carries as well.
Do you think, with regards to Elijah Arroyo, we see this every year, like, I mean, historically, and this is a new regime that is there in Seattle, and so it's different from what we have always, like, they just never used a tight end that frequently, right? And Noah Fant is a guy who's kind of like just been around for a long time, and kind of like, I feel like last year going into fantasy drafts, I thought, oh, maybe he gets a boost. Maybe he was just a victim of circumstances, you know, in the past. And then it kind of felt like, I don't know, like didn't turn into anything from a fantasy standpoint. I wonder, maybe is that Noah Fant? Is that just the way that they are going to use the tight end? Like, I'm always wondering with Seattle in general, like, is this ever going to become a thing? Are we ever going to use this position in a way that is effective for us in fantasy?
So if we're taking away what Kubiak did with the Saints, they will be on the field, which is, you know, half the battle there. And so I think Arroyo will be on the field in 12 personnel quite a bit. Like, I think the rate was like 30% of the time they were running 12. The Saints were last year. And so you're looking at the guys who were on the field last year: Foster Moreau, Juwan Johnson for the Saints. Like, no, not any like top tier talent, I'd say.
It's like a game by game projection.
Yeah. And so it's like, what percentage of those snaps in which he's on the field, which will be high as compared to most tight ends. I think, of course, like, he's going to have to perform well in camp. I think what percentage of the snaps end up being like usage plays. And that's what I'm kind of fuzzy on right now.
Right. Yeah. The Kubiak Saints thing too. Like, you had wide receivers going in and out. Like, it just felt like it was a revolving door there.
Yep.
So it almost, even the game by games where I did go, hey, this is a good week to target a tight end there, I wonder how much of that was a projection of just opportunity because they didn't have anybody else.
Yeah.
Which I don't love in terms of just projecting fantasy production on one guy playing that position in that offense. So we'll see. Steelers, Caleb Johnson. Now we're talking about a running back here who looks like he has walked into an opportunity. Similar to RJ Harvey in Denver, splitting the backfield with Jaylen Warren. This is where at some of the points that you made earlier about the Browns, this is the team that I have highlighted in this manner. I think he's going to get a lot of opportunity. I don't love the idea of being in the backfield of an offense that isn't projecting to be that great. And I don't see a way that this offense is great this year. I just don't see it. Like, where are they going? Let's assume for a second that they're going to bring in Aaron Rodgers. Like, I mean, you guys know at this point how I feel about what we have seen from Aaron Rodgers recently. So I don't have a lot of optimism that really elevates their quarterbacks that they have there right now. We're looking at Mason Rudolph and, forgive me, who else? Oh, well, Will Howard. Maybe
Will Howard, yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what to do with Caleb Johnson for that specific reason, I think.
Yeah, I think this offense is a kind of another stay away from me, even though they do have like the pieces. They do have Caleb Johnson. They do have DK Metcalf. They do have George Pickens. That being said, the way this ends up being a successful offense is as follows. They may be a lot higher on Will Howard than the rest of us. And moreover, I think they may be willing to run Will Howard in quarterback design run situations. And I think if he's effective on those and they utilize it in a way where you're getting, the zone runs that you like, and then you're playing off of it with like zone read, particularly quarterback rushes, I think there is a mix in which Arthur Smith is able to spin this offense up into something interesting. Like, I'll note that if you really look closely, squint twice and, spin around, look at it upside down, your Arthur Smith's like best years were with Derrick Henry and Tannehill, and the comp for like the body type comp for Derrick Henry was such for Caleb Johnson. And then Will Howard, kind of feels a little Tannehill-esque in terms of like just can run, operated an offense as it was meant to be run. And so
you did not just put him in the same sentence as Derrick Henry and make me look at him differently. That is like why are you doing this?
He's
to me?
not Derrick Henry. Certainly,
I know,
but
like, you
6'2",
just like
6'3", zone runner, gonna like bash through the offensive line. Like, I think the goal is to get back to that. And I think if you frame it that way, you can see what they're kind of trying to do, I think.
That's a really generous framing that now I'm not going to be able to ditch.
Certainly very generous.
I hate that you put that in my head. I like being clear about things. That just muddies it so much.
Mid-round quarterback and running back being all-pro running back and Pro Bowl quarterback is like very generous. Like, I'm being immensely forgiving here, but I can see what they're trying to do. I can see the vision, even though it's a little blurry, I guess is what I'm trying to say here.
Okay. Texans and all of the Jalen's and Jadens. Aside from it being a good thing that they're going to have their last names on their jerseys, they have a couple of wide receivers that they drafted that I think could potentially be interesting, right? Like, you've got Jaden Higgins, who they picked in the second round, pick 34. So we have to consider that as a priority in the offense, just because they use such a high resource on it. And then Jalen Knoll as a slot guy, I kind of think that that's an interesting piece. Also, the question for him becomes, can he push out Kirk? So we need to have a conversation about how this shakes out. We've got Nico, who obviously retains he's wide receiver 1. He's your X. That's actually probably good for Jaden Higgins, that he walks into an offense that has that. Then you've got Christian Kirk, you've got Tank Dell, you've got John Mechie. How do these two rookies fit into this picture in your mind?
I think they're probably going to be like depth piece pass catchers. The question is like, what is this offense going to look like? I think is my broader question, because, last year, Bobby Slovic, a lot of runs on first and second down. I would expect that to change. And so I think the ball will get a little bit more spread around, but like Nico is at least in my view, as the metrics view it, is like a top 5 receiver in the league right now. So the ball, the first read, the intended target is going to be Nico every play. And then Tank's pretty good too. So it's like, it's tough to really figure it out, I think. And I think it's going to be more depth pieces, and maybe this guy ends up being a really good player, but I'm projecting them a little. I don't know if I'd draft either of the rookies per se.
Okay. I think that this offense has to look so different. And I think that I feel like I see opportunity here. Like, I think it's, possible in an ideal scenario that Jalen Knoll pushes out Christian Kirk and takes over that spot. I think it's possible that Jaden Higgins is essentially a wide receiver 2. And then benefits from the fact that Nico is the wide receiver 1. Like you see in maybe Minnesota is a perfect example of that. Right? Where you have an obvious wide receiver 1, and then you've got your wide receiver 2, who is absolutely usable in fantasy because so much defensive attention is going to Justin Jefferson. So I am not 100% sure that that's the case here, but I think that the fact that they took him so early indicates to me that they are maybe hoping that that's the case here.
Right.
So I will be circling this just entire offense. I mean, for so many reasons, and not just related to the rookies, but like we need to know if we have CJ Stroud back. Like he was terrible last year, and not just in fantasy. Like it was all of his advanced metrics were bad. He was down at the bottom of the league in terms of advanced quarterback metrics. And clearly a lot of that is environmental and doesn't mean he's a bad quarterback, but like there's a lot of work that this offense needs. So I think both of those guys are really interesting fantasy pieces for me. My guess is at this point, they're probably late round guys anyway. So we'll have time to figure that out. Titans, Cam Ward. Are you interested in him for fantasy?
Let's
say it's a 12-team league. Yeah, me either. Yeah. Are you interested in any of the pieces that they put around him? They drafted 2 wide receivers, a tight end, a running back. There's certainly opportunity.
Yeah, there's
like the roster is like, hey, we can upgrade everything offensively. So that's enough.
It's still probably not.
Okay.
Not to be a downer here, but it would have to be like a crazy amount of volume, I think. For any one of these guys. But I think there's just too much uncertainty.
Well, and you already have some wide receivers there. You know what I mean? It's not like they didn't start with wide receivers prior to the draft. And so you assume like Ridley gets a bump, from Cam if it works out and goes in that direction. You don't have to slot one of these guys in there. I think that's fair too. There are certain offenses that you're just going to want to look at and go like, if I'm wrong, then let somebody else benefit from that. That's fine.
Yep.
But I don't feel strongly about that. Vikings, last team, drafted a couple of offensive pieces. Do they move the needle for you?
I just think like the Vikings are so stacked in the pass catching game, and then, I mean, I'm interested in the acquisition of Jordan Mason. I think Ty Felton was an interesting draft selection, especially given I think they're kind of drafting behind Jordan Addison a little bit. So I could be like slightly moved by Ty Felton, but I'm gonna have to see first, because even if he does get snaps, he's like the 5th option or the 4th option at that point.
Yeah.
So I think I'm gonna take a wait and see approach with Felton, but I am interested to find out more.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the top 2 wide receivers are set. The tight end is set. Like there are certain pieces that are set as priorities in the offense. And so if you are able to get on the field, like a Tank Dell is an interesting wide receiver 3 option going back 2 years to Houston because of the ways that they use him as a gadget piece. Like he's going to get low volume, but when he gets the volume, it's for a lot of yards, right? And so it's a big play. And so that can maybe help us in fantasy. Most of the time, your wide receiver 3 is not going to return a ton of fantasy value.
Right.
And so I think got to see it is good analysis. Okay. So in terms of takeaways from this, what are your main takeaways, having gone team by team now, in terms of what you feel strongly about?
So I think the biggest ones are, there's a real shot that Trevion Henderson is the best rookie running back. I think that's the main takeaway, like from a positive perspective of like, people are going to jump on Ashton Genty and just like hold your water and perhaps try to get a guy like Henderson. And I think also our discussion about Johnson with the Steelers is also kind of in this realm. So I think that's takeaway number 1. Takeaway number 2, which would, like, if we're talking about football, like the grander scheme of things, I think is technically takeaway number 1, is that I'm just have like some big questions about the first round tight ends. Like I don't see it. I can see it playing out long term. I don't see it playing out this year for them in the way that it did for Brock Bowers. And I think that's like kind of a massive takeaway in fantasy and kind of in general. So that's why I
suppose the 2 are kind of linked, right? Because in order to get the volume in general to really make a name for yourself in either place.
Yeah.
I don't know that exists in Chicago. and it might not be possible in Indy.
Right. And I think that what the back end of that is that Mason Taylor just might be the best tight end in this draft.
Oh, I think that's a
is
fun
interesting.
takeaway.
Yeah. And so I think that's the two main. Oh, and then the last takeaway is Ted McMillan. Really shocked by how much I love that pick. And so that's the third kind of takeaway as well.
All right. I love that as well. I have a feeling that my rookie draft, my rankings would look a little bit different if I put them together right now from what is typically seen out there.
Yep.
Although it's, are we talking about dynasty? Or are we talking about 2025? And if we're just talking about 2025, which is what we did in this very long exercise, got to get better at organizing. Hopefully people will figure out as they start listening to this and they see 2 hours that they can go team by team and it's in alphabetical order in the manner in which we did it. And so they can just kind of scroll ahead and be like, oh, we're on the Panthers now. Okay, that means that the Patriots are next. Something like that.
Yeah.
So we'll have to put that in the notes. We're not used to being here for 2 hours, but thank you so much for everybody who has stuck with us for this entire process. I hope it was helpful for you. Let us know in the comments, shoot us messages on the social media channels at Sumer Sports, and let us know who your favorite rookie fantasy player is for 2025. I would be really curious to see if you're on the same wavelength as us. Thanks for being with us.